Okay. Well, hello, welcome everyone. This is a combating anti-Black racism, the series, and today we're specifically talking about immigration. But before we get into that, we just wanted to acknowledge that it's been a year since George Floyd's death, and this series was a direct result of kind of the action and the movement around George Floyd's death, and really was about centering Black voices and Black issues. Um, so before we get started, really wanted to acknowledge that and wanted to emphasize that racism is not only an issue in the United States, hence why we have global panelists. And if you've attended other panels through the series, that has also been the case. So yeah, let's get started. This is also June Immigrant Heritage Month, so this conversation fell on a really good time. It was actually initially supposed to be in May, I think last weekend during Memorial Day weekend, but we knew people were probably going to be out living their best lives. So it actually worked out that we pushed it to June because it is Immigrant Heritage Month. So let us get started. Oh, and then just in terms of the series, if you want to check out previous sessions and like key takeaways, hop on that Linktree link, and Alan, can you send that in the chat? It's also on the flyer in a bunch of places, but you could check out previous sessions, key takeaways, and also sign up for the email list for sessions going forward. Okay. All right, so to start us off, we are going to start with a poll. Alan, do you want to put it in? Okay, so the question is, which countries in the world receive the most refugees? So if everyone can just take a minute to select. Okay, has everyone, okay, I think there's still some more answers coming in. Okay, I think everyone has voted besides me, because I don't want to give it away. Okay, everyone's voted? Yeah, you could put a thumbs up on your, okay. So the answer is Lebanon. Wait, no, Jordan and Uganda. I'm sorry. So it's Jordan and Uganda, which is something that a lot of people don't know because I think there's just this like, there is this myth that Western countries take on more refugees and just take on more immigrants in general. But actually, the countries that take on like the most immigrants and refugees are in the global South. So, and Uganda is actually my home country. So that is a fun fact. I actually didn't know this myself before preparing for this panel. So hope that was a fun fact for y'all. Okay, so let's get into the conversation. So just before we start, I know like we're all looking formal. I got my little blazer on, but I really do want this conversation to be a conversation, just because it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm like 100% positive it's near and dear to Joella and Ria's hearts. So really just want this to be a free-flowing conversation, and then towards the end we'll have Q&As, and other people on this call can jump in and provide their commentary or any questions that they might have. So yes, this is a formal panel, but I really do want to kind of have a like formal but also informal conversation about migration and immigration. So let us get started with introducing speakers. I can introduce myself first, and then Joel and Ria, please hop in. So my name is Shannon Degide. I currently work for a company called Free Will. It is an estate planning company. So they just provide accessible resources for like estate planning and wealth transfer. I am a content associate there, but I am going to medical school in August. So just sidetracked for a little bit and now heading into like the career path that I'm actually trying to pursue. And I'm also part of an organization called Undocu Black with Joella, where we have what's it called? We center Black undocumented issues. And so I'm DACA and currently reside in the US. And for those that don't know what DACA is, I'm hoping everyone does, but it was an executive order that Obama passed in like early, I guess 2010, right, Joella? I think. And so that allowed a bunch of immigrant children to have some type of temporary status to stay and work in the US. So that's me. Joella, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. My name is Joella Roberts. I use she, her pronouns, and I too am undocumented with DACA and unafraid. Originally from Trinidad and Tobago, came here when I was 4 years old. Actually, my grandmother, who passed last month, was the reason that my mother, myself, and my brother came to the United States for safety. And so I've called DC home just as much as I do Trinidad and Tobago. And so, you know, of course, knowing you, being a part of Undocu Black, I'm super grateful for the community that I've been around, been able to work with and for, but I'm very familiar with what it feels like to be an immigrant and a Black immigrant and a Black woman, just lonely, confused, even in a lot of these spaces. And so I work to be a bridge for the diaspora and just understanding Blackness, immigration, criminal justice, like literally all of the systems, homelessness, mental health, because we don't live single issued lives. And a lot of people don't consider safety in their citizenship status. And so really just building awareness and advocacy and change on behalf of our communities through higher ed, working as the university program coordinator at Forward, working with Undocu Black and United We Dream as a core leader and member, the ICE Out of DC Coalition, to make sure that ICE is not wreaking havoc in the city of Washington, DC, and just like so many other things. So I'm super grateful for the work that has come before me and the work that we're going to produce together. Thank you. Oh, and DACA is actually, the 9-year anniversary is this year. So June 15th will be the 9-year anniversary of DACA. So yeah, it's been a minute.
Ria, do you want to go ahead and talk?
Yes.
Thank you, Joella.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful that this discussion is happening and that we'll be able to shed light on what really goes on in migration and all the things that work around it. My name is Ria Kwewor. I'm speaking from Accra. I'm Ghanaian and I live in Ghana as well. My background is in economic integration for refugees and migrants. And I had a company that provides unconditional basic income that's crypto funded to 11,500 refugees in Africa and 5,000 migrants in India. And I work as the global lead for equity and inclusion for the Global Shapers community of the World Economic Forum. I'm really happy to be here and to learn the different perspectives on migration.
Okay, so first of all, like I'm just blown away by both of y'all because you guys are doing amazing, amazing, amazing work. I also, didn't even say where I'm from originally. I'm originally from Uganda, but I grew up in New York for the majority of my childhood. So that's what I claim as home, and currently in Brooklyn, New York, but also part of the DC Global Shapers. Okay, all right, so let's get into some of these questions, just because I do want to leave a little bit of time at the end for people to ask questions for the panelists. So the first one is, what are the oppressive systems in the countries you identify with that lead to migration? And so for, I think Joella and I, that's going to be like Uganda, but then also touching on the US. Maria, please feel free to, whatever country that you identify with, Ghana, most likely, but yeah.
So for Ghana and a lot of so I've lived and traveled in and around Africa quite a bit. And the key issue that leads to migration and uninformed migration that we've found out through our research is lack of political will, bad policies, and just governments not supporting their citizens. So this is the crux of the matter. There's unfortunately a lot of oppression from local governments with regards to migration and job finding and that sort of thing. And so we find that 86% of our citizens are migrating in and within African countries. And the main issue that they tell us is that their governments are not supportive of them. And this is what's causing them to migrate, looking for greener pastures. But this happens within Africa, contrary to popular belief that the largest numbers of migrants from Africa are leaving Africa to Europe. 86% of that happens within the continent.
Thank you. Joella?
Thank you. I would first like to begin by saying migration is not a crime, it is a human right. And you should have the bodily autonomy, the legality, and all these things to support where you want to put your body or where you want to migrate if you want to. And so I identify, of course, with Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, being a colonized country and having to liberate ourselves. And you talk about like migration, when you talk about the slave trade, like there's a lot of perspective. But initially, Trinidad and Tobago wasn't a country that accepted asylum seekers, and that changed in maybe 2000. And we have roughly like 3% of our population are in fact migrants seeking asylum. And so we have a very diverse population. We literally, that's part of our pride and joy, is just like the different kinds of people that are a part of our nations, but of course, a predominantly Black country. And then I identify sometimes with the United States. And, just acknowledging that there are push and pull factors. And so, people come to, migrate in general because of war, for instance, and poverty. For my family, it wasn't war or poverty that we moved. It was because of violence and interpersonal violence at that. But then people also migrate for school, right? We have international students that are often left out of the conversation and kind of don't benefit from a lot of migration laws and things, and advocacy and things like that. So there are definitely push and pull factors as to why people migrate, but just acknowledging that we're in a current climate of global pandemic. And so if we are suffering in quote unquote first world nations, which are just countries who didn't fight did fight in the World War and led the World War, third world countries are suffering. My country right now is on complete lockdown, meaning like people cannot leave their home at all. And so this, of course, would be reasons for migration. And in times like this, you see crime and all these other things. So that's like a condensed response of like migration and purpose.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I'm the moderator, but I'm also gonna provide input where I can. So yeah, for Uganda, the poverty rate is just insane. Like as of right now, it's 87%, which is huge. So that means the majority of the country just like there's no work, there's no jobs. And so a little bit of background for me, I actually might have a little bit of a different story than Joel and Rhea. My parents actually still live in Uganda. So I grew up here with my aunties and my uncles. But my mom, wanted to provide a better life for me here and for my sister, who is actually a US citizen. So it's a little bit different for her. But yeah, I have like my direct contact to Uganda is still my immediate family. So yeah, so poverty rate is insane. We also have just never had a peaceful transition of power since our independence in the 60s. So I don't know if you guys know who Idi Amin was, but he was a dictator who literally slaughtered up to 300,000 plus people in Uganda in the 5 years that he ruled. And since then, it's just been like a cascade of leaders who have taken power through violence. And so the current president slash not really president, dictator, Museveni, has been in office for, I think, 34 years. It's either 34 or 37 years. And, you know, he is the I put president in quotation marks because he runs every term and wins, but to oppose him means death, right? I have relatives who live here in the US who have been like outwardly against him on, Facebook and social media channels, who literally cannot travel back home because they are fearful that they will die if they land back home. So there's a lot of things going on there. There's violence, there's poverty. And I mean, not to say, Uganda is also an amazing country with great people. My mother is someone that has had access to Western countries, but refuses to leave. Like that's her home. That's where she grew up. That's what she knows. Even though she's like the most savvy person in terms of, she's just like a hustler, right? And you have to be in Uganda, but she's like a hustler, and she probably knows New York better than I do, actually. But that's her home. So, but there's a lot of things and factors as to why people want to migrate to other places. All right, so let's get into this next question. So how does it feel to be a citizen or not a citizen of a place and be othered after migrating? Ria, do you want to take this one first?
Yes, I mean, so I've never lived outside of, well, I've never lived in Europe or the Americas. I have lived in Asia for a while, and I experienced a lot of racism there. In Singapore, people felt shocked to see a Black person all the time, including just asking for directions. So that was difficult, and was part of the reasons that I left and came back to Ghana, because I couldn't stand it over there. But I've never quite felt that way traveling within Africa, except for when I was traveling through countries in which there was an ongoing war or a coup d'etat, like Mali and Burkina Faso. I suppose the most different thing that I had to do than when I was living in Ghana was to constantly carry an ID card, but there wasn't any direct discrimination because I was from another African country. And so thankfully that isn't a grave problem that we're facing here. I know there are certain countries that experience high levels of xenophobia and restriction against migrants, such as South Africa, and sometimes Ghana against Nigerians because of heightened crime rates and cyber fraud that goes on when Nigerians and Ghanaians collaborate in these areas. And so there is that, but by and large, there isn't a sense of feeling othered when you're traveling through Africa as another African.
Yeah, that's real. And I wish that was the case here. Joella, do you want to go next?
Of course. This is like a question, like I rant and rave about this every single day. So like, thank you for the opportunity on this platform. I'm a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. What we understand as being undocumented is really a supplemental reference for previously being referred to as illegal aliens, illegal foreigners, all these things. And so we use the new jargon undocumented to simply just give background that we don't have legal residency or citizenship in this country. So since I've been here from the age of 4, have been undocumented because the immigration system is not at all broken. It keeps being referred to as broken, but it's actually performing exactly as it's supposed to, excluding those who are not rich, white, and 1%. And so making years of wait and struggle for those like myself. And so previous to DACA, because I was only able to access DACA in 2015, it's important to acknowledge that as an undocumented person, I don't have the right to work myself or my mother, who is now and like proceedings to get her citizenship. But myself, I've aged out of her application. So if DACA does not provide me a pathway to citizenship, I will not be able to work. I will not be able to buy a home. I will not be able to drive. I will not be able to do a lot of things. And so growing up in this country, I was able to quote unquote assimilate because that's what a lot of immigrants are forced to do, to be 100% honest. Like I was bullied so bad. I was literally bullied out of my accent. And for my pigment and all these other things. And so America often refers to themselves as being a melting pot. And this is 100% accurate, because when you come to this country, you basically have to dilute and water down all that you know and love, and just basically blend in with the rest of society, so that one, you're not troubled, but two, you could just like barely make it. And in contrast to that, I really would prefer for America to be like a tossed salad, like a Caesar salad or something like that. Like you're able to have that same pride that your mother has, right? About like Uganda and coming to the United States, and it can be comfortable for her to speak about certain things. And so acknowledging that I still have these feelings even with DACA, because they are DACA is temporary. It's something that I have to renew every 2 years, understanding that under the Trump administration, there was hundreds of attacks on TPS holders, DACA recipients, undocumented people, asylum seekers, literally every immigrant population. And so it was a reminder, a jarring reminder that I am temporary to this people, and I only matter because of my economic contributions. And that's clear because once again, I have to pay for my livelihood. And then when it comes to taxes, literal exploitation, because I'm not able to vote. I'm not able to elect like leaders who are making literally decisions on every waking part of my life, because policy is so influential, and arguably even more influential on my life because I am not a citizen. And so it's really important that, we remember that even though the perspective that I experience is being an immigrant in the United States, something such as birthright citizenship is not something that is granted to like Black people in other countries such as like Italy, right? Where you have to fight between the age of like 17 to 18 to be recognized as a citizen because your grandfather is not white. Like, so as much as I, complain and struggle and fight in this country, I still acknowledge like immigration on a global perspective and as it relates to Black people is extreme, like terrible. And so I honor the experience of myself, but still acknowledge my privilege even in this country as a DACA recipient.
Oh, thank you, Joel. Yo, that gave me chills because I think you echo a lot of the sentiments that I have. And I think sometimes you put the things that I feel into words. So same with Joella, I am DACA, and I came here when I was 6 years old, and I had a little bit of a different story. I came here on a 2-year visa that expired. And so for probably the first, I guess, 9 years that I was in the US, I actually didn't know that I was undocumented. It was only until I was like 15 that my family was like, hey, you're about to, start applying for colleges. It's going to be a little different for you. And so, yeah, I got DACA, I think at the age of 17, right before I went to college, thank God. And so that allowed me to, have a driver's license and the ability to work, also to receive, private financial aid, I guess. Actually, I guess I could have received private financial aid from schools without DACA, but I think that added piece like helped put a lot of colleges at ease. And so, yeah, just echoing Joela's sentiments, it's insane because I feel as though like we've been fighting for this issue for so long. And it's funny because people will always be like, you've been here for, 17 years. Like, can't you just do ABC thing and get your citizenship? And I was like, baby, if it was that easy, I would have done it already. But yeah, we've been fighting for this for so long. And I think like the older I get, the more I realize that it also is really a money scheme, right? The way that I pay my taxes every single year to not, receive any, rights as a citizen back. And also Social Security, like we also get Social Security taken out that we don't receive because we're not citizens. So there's that. And then also DACA being renewed every 2 years. So you have to renew your DACA every 2 years, but really it's every year and a half, right? Because you can't, you don't want to have a lapse in your status. So you're really renewing like 5 to 6 months before your actual status like ends. So it's a money scheme that I think there's definitely a reason why it's moved very, very, very slow. And a bajillion bills have been put into the legislature to see if they would get passed since like the early 2000s. And here we are in 2021 and nothing yet. And so for me, I think that for me, it was a little different because I didn't know I was undocumented for a very large portion of my life, right? And so when I finally found out that I was undocumented, it wasn't like, it didn't necessarily take up my identity because I didn't know for a long time. I was just kind of like, oh, I was even telling my friends at school, I remember like in high school, I was like, oh yeah, I'm undocumented. And they would just be like, whoa, that's a crazy thing to say. But I didn't even realize the gravity of it until I think I was applying to colleges. And yeah, just having to constantly advocate for yourself in spaces, I think is the biggest thing for me, right? Like I'm very comfortable in who I am and my status, right? So I'm someone, and Joella as well, like we're not afraid of telling our story. We're not afraid of talking about our status. But I think having to constantly advocate for yourself in spaces to be like, you deserve to be here, right? And so for me, like the process to get to, I speak about college a lot because that's when I really had to like do that and understand the gravity of what it meant to be undocumented. And so for like instance, for me for college, like it was very much like calling admissions offices, explaining to them what DACA was and like what I was able to do and bring to the school, And so that was like my first experience. And even now, like that DACA has been kind of, more publicized and people know about it. Even for the med school process, right? I'm going to UCLA in August, but they are technically a state school, even though they don't feel like it. But they don't offer any financial aid to someone who is not a resident of California or a citizen, right? And so I had to kind of advocate for myself and be like, hey, I'm neither of these things, but your acceptance rate is 2%. Why would you accept me if that was not, if you weren't going to provide a pathway for me to actually go, right? And so luckily things got sorted out. I'm able to get financial aid now, but I think it just goes to like speak to the fact that I constantly have to advocate for myself in spaces, even though it's been a long time. The public knows about it. There's still a lot of infrastructure that does not include DACA, does not include undocumented people. So having to constantly like fight for yourself. And I'm thankful that I have, I don't like to say I'm confrontational, I'm assertive. I'm from New York and Uganda, and we're assertive people, and my mother is very assertive. And so I have the energy to like fight for myself, but a lot of people don't, right? And so I think that's something that I take into consideration all the time. And if I didn't, speak up when I speak up, I don't think I would be in the places that I'm at now. Okay.
Heartbreaking. There's no way, you can't guess this sort of information that you shared. And so that leads back to a large part of the problem that we face here with people migrating to Europe and the Americas, and then arriving and becoming sorely disappointed because they apparently had no idea about what sorts of things they were going to face over there and what sort of challenges they would have to overcome. And I think a large part of the problem here also is that we're not telling people who are migrating that these are the sorts of issues that they will face in these new continents that they're going to. And it's all intentional. I don't believe that it's beyond our leaders or the people in charge of these portals to provide basic information to people migrating. All too often, I'm on a flight, I'm going outside of the continent, and I meet people who look semi-confused, and I get into a chat with them either at the airport or on board and ask them where they're going. And they go like, oh, I'm going to so-and-so. And I'm like, oh, what are you going to do when you get there? And they're like, we're not sure, but someone's told us that they'll tell us when we arrive. And you'll notice that they are either drawn into slavery or some other form of underhand activity. And there's no way that local people at an airport would recognize that people might be migrating to their peril, and our governments will not know about it because they go through several steps before they arrive at the airport, before they're allowed visas, before they're able to leave their country and their continents. And there's not enough information, if any at all, about the sorts of perils that migrants may be going to face abroad. And so they're not able to prepare themselves or to better advise themselves. You'll find that in several African countries, families and communities are saving up cash to pay for one person to leave the continent and to initiate remittances back home. And they're not aware of what's going to happen when they arrive because no one's telling them. And part of the onus is on us as well, who are living abroad and who've lived abroad, who have connections abroad, to send back info on this, because a lot of Africans will travel and take photographs next to other people's cars and other people's houses to create the guise that they're living well and living large and everything's working out for them, because they want to keep up appearances back home about having migrated to Europe and the Americas. And it's absolute nonsense. And I think it's high time we start talking about it and treating it and keep more people from falling into modern day slavery and other things.
That, yes, amen. I also just want to, I think from a Western perspective, we've talked a lot about undocumented immigrants, but I'm not even gonna say legal, but documented immigrants as well, people who have some type of residency or whatever status in the US, have their own challenges as well, right? As immigrants in this country. My auntie was 16 when she left Uganda, and she was literally the top of her class in Uganda and was selected for a scholarship to go study abroad in Italy for 2 years. From there, she ended up getting a scholarship to go to college in the US. She actually went to my school. And she since then has been in the US for 20 plus years. She is now the CFO of a company in America, but she constantly tells me about her struggle as a Black woman, as an immigrant woman who, when she came to the US, right, had an accent and was a little bit green, didn't know all the ways of navigating corporate America. She also did investment banking in the 2000s, which is insane because that's a different type of life. But constantly having to kind of validify her existence in this space, even now as a CFO, where she's questioned. She would tell me all the time, oh, I'd be in meetings and this partner or this what's it called, client, right, that we're trying to work with comes in and they're like, hey, I actually don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to the junior white associate over there. And that's happened throughout her whole career, right? And so I really just want to affirm that, granted, yes, undocumented immigrants have to advocate for themselves in a specific way, but also just being an immigrant in any country is hard as it is. There's a lot of structures in place. There's a lot of racism in place that affects you as not only being a Black person, but also as an immigrant. So that's another discussion in its own, and we can go for hours on that. Joella, did you want to add something?
Yes, y'all are on fire. First and foremost, I'm just yes, notes. But it's really important in this moment to kind of also add, not go on a completely different road, but I think it's important to bring other people in this space. Title 42, Google it. Title 42 is basically a policy created during the Trump era to basically end asylum and refuge for people coming to the United States and close the border under the guise of COVID-19. And so even though President Trump, rightfully so, has been getting a lot of flack for all of the things that he's enacted during his term, Joe Biden, our current president, has in his third month deported more people under Title 42 than President Trump did in the entire year of 2020. And so hundreds of thousands of people, almost 500,000 people have been deported under Joe Biden under this one policy. And so it's important to remember that even though migration for a lot of people is, okay, come on, Links, thank you. Even though migration is a choice sometimes for people, it's also important to remember that a lot of people are displaced. And for a lot of reasons, because of things that this country and other Western powers are enacting on their country. So it's kind of talking about a perception of like the dream, literally, that America is selling to immigrants when they come here, realize that it's completely false. And then also the perception of our origins. Like I remind people that my country, we have free healthcare, we have free education. Like as much as people want to shade us for like being impoverished and struggling, because we are, because of racism and colonialism, imperialism, and all those things. It's also important to remember and have pride in like countries like Haiti being unfortunately the martyr, but what should have been the blueprint for like freedom and what countries should do to take care of themselves. And now, unfortunately, you have a lot of people fleeing that country to come here under, to me, Stockholm syndrome, to get refuge and care. But just remembering like all of these things are true. So like sometimes it's not even a choice that you migrate to this country. And then when you literally come with the clothes on your back, if you have on clothes, some people. So it doesn't matter what perception it's sold. It's really a matter of survival for a lot of people, which is scary. And that's why we're doing the work to not only repair our countries of origin so people don't have to migrate to begin with, end all US imperialism so that people don't have to migrate to begin with, and then also improve the lives of those who migrated to this country and choose this country as home so that their experience is not exacerbated because of racism and all these other things.
Exactly. That's powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to build on that also and speak about the part of Africa that migrates because of poverty. This leads back to the United Nations and the European Union and these global powers not speaking about what's actually going on. So a lot of people don't know this, but 14 African countries pay hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes to France every year. It's called the post-colonial tax. And the entire world has been in denial of it, but it's really happening. And you can't expect to keep countries so impoverished and expect them to do well enough to house their own citizens. Of course, they're going to migrate. And it's really ironic and disgusting at the same time that they create this economic strife by the policies that they have, and they complain about people migrating to their continent because of poverty. And it boggles my mind why France still has a permanent seat at the United Nations, and why the EU does not talk about this, why the UN does not talk about this, why Amnesty International does not talk about this. And these are core issues that lead to migration as well, and that lead to poverty, and that lead to countries never being able to come out of the economic strife that they're in. A lot of people complain that African governments are inadequate and inept, and a large portion of that is true. But then the numbers don't lie either. It's really hard to economically integrate all your citizens when you're paying so much in tax to the country that mints your money, and you're paying other subsidiary taxes as well. And France, for instance, they have final say and primary say on what goes on in Francophone education. They have final say on what goes on in trade in Francophone countries. They have the final say on what goes on in military training in Francophone countries. And so they're controlling very, very key areas of a continent's economics. And they turn around and complain about Africans migrating to these continents. And it's disgusting, and it's high time we came out of our shells and spoke about this.
Oh my God, wait. So first of all, I love how free flowing this conversation is, because I definitely have like 2 more questions, but we can keep going on this. No, Ria, that's so true. And I literally like say this until the cows go home. Not even just from that tax, right? That post-colonial tax. The Western hemisphere loves to say that they give all this money and aid, right, to these African countries. And guess who they give it to? They usually just give it to the leaders in power, who they know are not going to distribute it to the people, right? So it's this whole thing of like, oh, America just gave however million of dollars to Uganda, knowing that it's going to Museveni and his family and his military, not to the actual people that deserve it, right? So it's like, how do you reconcile the two? You have an 87% poverty rate, but you're giving millions of dollars in aid to this country. And it's been going on for years. So they know, right? If I, Chanel Degede, who does not study policy at all, who is not in that realm at all, can like put two and two together and be like, well, that doesn't add up. They definitely know as well. So it's a, again, this whole money scheme. And it's funny because, you know, the Western world loves to paint Africa and other third world countries as being corrupt, but they're feeding the corruption, right? Like they're literally funding the corruption. Without their money, these governments or the leaders in power that are corrupt are not able to do what they do, right? So yeah, that's a whole nother conversation, but yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
I also wanted to give credit to community, like always, because unfortunately, when our governments are failing us, it is us and our loved ones, our folks, our people in proximity that helped us. It's like a known fact that there are literally immigrants in like this country that are keeping the economies of their countries of origin alive, like literally taking care of their entire families because of this truth. Because like, let's get into poverty. Like my brother works 16 hours a day, and what is equivalent to like $2.30 in US dollars per hour. And so we can talk about like there's so many layers to this, but it's also important that while we fight for like economic mobilities in our countries of origin, it's also important that immigrants, because remember, being undocumented means that you don't even have work authorization. So in addition to trying to meet the basic needs of yourself in a country that literally feels like you're a felon, you shouldn't be here, you also have to take care of your entire family that is struggling back home. So it's just so many layers and issues and problems, but it's really important like for America to recognize, like even though they put a lot of importance of immigrants being our like economic input and things like that, it is important to acknowledge that we do you know, add so much money to the global economy. And so what would it be if we were actually able to work, like to get legitimate paperwork to validate like taking care of all these other nations and like what the world would look like. So just remembering that all of these dominoes effects are global when it comes to oppression of governments. And it's just super hard to watch, but it's really important that we continue to take care of each other.
Yes, thank you guys. This has been an interesting conversation. I'm gonna wrap up the formal questions and then have panelists answer some questions from the audience. But just wanted to tie up this conversation with this last question about what does it look like for people to live their full potential once they migrate? How can we support, you know, the work of those on the ground like Joella and Ria, who are really pushing for migration and immigration like rights and like livelihood for people? How can we support your work? How can we, you know, push the envelope and the conversation so that it becomes more mainstream? Yeah, just all of that.
Well, with regards, I'm just going to go with regards to helping migrants live their lives to their full potential. I think the work starts from before they become migrants. The work starts from information and education and making sure that they have all those structures in place before they actually decide to migrate. And that again leads back to how clearly are we communicating what's happening outside of the continent and outside of the country, and how is this information reaching them? Is it reaching them at all? Who's in charge of providing this information? Who's in charge of sourcing it? Where is it coming from? How credible is it? How reliable is it? I think we need to make sure that all this information is reaching our citizens, because strength comes in information first. You know, going out there is not the issue. It's how prepared are we to go out there? So we need to make sure that the right information is reaching our masses, so that the people who are going to migrate are well informed, they're well prepared before they do. Otherwise, this thing goes so very deeply. It messes with your self-esteem, it messes with your productivity, it destroys your family because you're not able to contribute even something as yourself back to your family because you're completely shocked as to what you expected because you're not receiving the right information. And also screaming about policy change. For those who are in positions to influence policy change or to talk about the things that need to be inputted in policy should start doing that. It's really, really important because a lot of the noise that we make won't go anywhere if we don't have policies and structures in place to support these things. It's just going to be noise on social media that will dissipate because the next week something else will become a buzzword or a catchphrase that will take over the internet. We need policies, and we need, through these policies, to hold our governments and systems of government accountable to our citizens. So with regards to helping with the work that we do, I think forums like this are very, very important. And again, making sure that people know about what's going on. I've noticed that it's very rare for people outside of our space to know what's actually going on in the space. It's not a very sexy topic, and so no one talks about it. We don't tweet about it. We don't have forums about it. And so this is a really helpful thing to do, gathering thought leaders or experts in these areas and having them talk about the real problems on the ground, and then disseminating this information and making it public knowledge the same way that we know tidbits of what's going on in other sectors. So I think those would be the most effective ways to ensure that migrants are able to live their lives to their full potential.
Wow. Every time. I would add on top of that, just to acknowledge that, agreeing that, you know, policy is extremely important, especially as that is what's the guiding force for how our society operates. But just, I personally believe that policy should not have a chokehold on my survival. So it's like, it shouldn't be up to the moral compass of some random person in a room with 50 to 100 other people who have the same power and no accountability to basically determine every waking part of my existence and livelihood. Personally, I don't feel like that should be how it is, because you see like corruption, you see greed, you see like own perception and things like that. So anyway, also do like fighting for those who are equitable and just and this and a third to represent us in this current system that we exist in until we see that day. Next, starting and correcting conversations. Even though you may not be an immigrant, you have now participated in this conversation. You have learned a lot. Speak up and speak out and correct people when they're talking about immigrants and immigration, because you are just as important in this conversation. Because to be honest, it's emotionally and spiritually, all these things exhausting to not only have to fight for your life, but then getting people to understand why you exist on top of that. So be a true ally by taking up that fight for us. Also donating to organizations that are doing the work. We named Undocu-Black, United We Dream. I founded my own organization, Migration Matters. You can donate to local organizations because it often, like your dollar often means more, and even immigrants directly. Like if you know someone who's an immigrant and struggling on their bills, it will mean more, that $100 will mean more to them personally than a huge, large nonprofit organization. So being in community and helping immigrants that you're actually surrounded by will be extremely helpful. And then lastly, this quote by Rumi was really powerful when it was like, when I was smart or like clever, I wanted to change the world, but when I was wise, I wanted to change myself. And so just a reminder to do that work and introspection that you are a part of that change. Finding your purpose and passion is going to help us get to that point. But first, we must make sure that everyone is capable to meet their basic needs. Like when you talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, everyone should have the right to food, to water, to shelter, etc. Like, how do you expect people to engage in social justice and all these things when they don't even know where their next meal is coming? So after we help make sure that everyone's basic needs are met, it's imperative that we move towards self-actualization. And I tell my friend that all the time. I'm like, yes, you're going to med school. Like, I'm working in immigration. Just because you're an immigrant doesn't mean you have to work in immigration. But if you are a person, a part of a community, in some way, shape, or form, whatever your passion and purpose is, it has to contribute to the larger collective. So whether that's the medical field, making sure that the mortality for Black women is is depleted. Like if you're a legal aid, making sure that your pro bono is going to those who can't even pay their bail, that are literally sitting in prisons innocent. So whatever your work might be, just making sure that it's helping communities in some way, shape, or form, because we all create the collective. The I creates we. We all working together.
Facts.
Yes. No, and Joella touched on a really good point. I think we were actually having a conversation about this earlier this week, Joella and I think that for me, like my activism has looked different, right? I think Ria and Joella like really work directly in these spaces of immigration and policy around it, right? Whereas for me, I think that I've been slowly dismantling things and trying to change policy within like small structures, right? So for instance, I guess like even something that I didn't necessarily do. The reason I was able to go to the school that I went to and receive the funding that I went to for college was because there was a group of a group of immigrants who were not necessarily undocumented who went to my school beforehand, who really advocated for McAllister, which is the school I went to admit and financially provide for undocumented students, right? So that was literally passed a year before I applied for college. And that is the entire reason why I was able to go, why I was able to, not struggle in terms of financial aid, because again, for undocumented immigrants, for DACA included, we can't receive federal funding in any capacity. So that's federal financial aid. That's like even, taking on research opportunities that are funded by the federal government. We can't receive any of that money. And so, yeah, just really advocating for yourself in spaces and therefore advocating for people who come after. So now I'm hoping that having pushed the envelope with UCLA, because when they told me that, if you're not a resident of California and if you're not a citizen, you're not able to receive any federal financial aid, I was like, hey, that's cool. Please give me the contact of the diversity inclusion head. Please give me the contact of the head of admissions, the head of the medical school, because I'm like, we need to have these conversations, right? Because now this is a diversity inclusion issue. You're basically saying that you're barring my acceptance to, or my ability to attend medical school because of my status, even though you've accepted me, right? And so, yeah, hopefully that will like continue going forward. So other undocumented students who are not California residents, who are not to have any like status or even any DACA status, are able to receive federal financial aid from the medical school. And so for me, it's really just pushing those envelopes like as much as I can for myself and for people like me, so that, someone else does not have to go through that struggle and doesn't have to, contact the head of admissions, contact whoever, to literally just go to school. So yeah, so I think educating yourself is very, very important, and also just like advocating for yourself in spaces. It doesn't have to be this grandiose thing, but really just, yeah, making sure that like on an everyday basis that like you're enacting change in some way, and that could look really, really small, or it could look really, really big, like the work that Joella and Ria are doing. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful for people. We have literally 4 minutes. I don't know if people have a hard stop at 12, but I do want to give the audience ability to ask some questions if they would like. Okay, great.
I can stay on as well.
Awesome. Okay, audience members, if you have a question, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you, because I don't think you have the ability to unmute yourself on this panel.
Okay, so I'm just gonna quickly jump in as we're looking for our audience members to share. Everything you all were saying, I was just like, yes, I completely agree. And thank you so much for all the work that you do on a regular basis. As someone who is a child of immigrants from Mali, a country that just had a coup of a coup, where this idea of being able to realize your full potential in that country is very difficult to do. I'm very thoughtful about the issue of migration, and I have, aunts and uncles who have been undocumented and who have been in this country for several years. And that's because of what you all described as migration being a human right, but also not necessarily by choice because of the neocolonialism and the systems that exist and that inform that decision. So you all shared some really insightful ways of what we can do on the ground in terms of being supportive. And I also wanted to just dive a little bit deeper into that. So I have a nonprofit organization focused on the advancement of Black women in the economics profession. And as we're building out our programming, such as having like high school clubs that are focused on economics, I'm thinking about, based on this conversation, how we can be intentional about including those who are undocumented, because I think that that's something that you have to say out loud. You can't just say that I am supporting those who are undocumented. You have to say it out loud, put it on your website, let people know, and be very upfront. So when it comes to jobs in particular, how can we help when it comes to job access for those who are undocumented? So for instance, we're working on having a job board. And in that, we're thinking about international students and making it clear, like which jobs are for those who are US citizens, et cetera. But how can we make it easier for those who are undocumented to access job opportunities and to be able to realize whatever it is that they want to explore further through our events and what we offer?
I can answer. First and foremost, thank you so much. That's the first step. It's just like acknowledging that there's more than I can do, and I have a power in my capacity, and I'm going to use it to advocate on behalf of this specific group. And so, thank you, and acknowledging. Come on, immigrant background, immigrant heritage month. Woo woo! It's our month. But yeah, accessing work opportunities, of course, is extremely hard because as an undocumented immigrant, you do not have a social security number to work. However, what you can apply for is a tax ID number. What you can create is an LLC. And so acknowledging that if you have job opportunities, that you make it accessible to those who have tax ID, ITTIN numbers, as well as contracting work through limited liability corporations. And then also you can do like stipend-based works, things that you can give like a $500 gift card where you can come in for one opportunity and just pay them through like gift card or another like form of like gifts or whatever that might be. Because acknowledging that even though money is like, you can give someone money and they can determine what they want to do with it. But there are other ways that you can be of assistance, whether that's opportunities, mentorships. A lot of people forget that in addition to being an immigrant and undocumented, you're also first gen. So you're navigating this professional, because every profession is a profession, but like corporate professional environment for the first time alone. And so sometimes mentorship, just like resume review, like something that you have as a resource, just giving it to the community in general and not necessarily needing anything back, like that it will be extremely helpful as well. But if you're looking for like opening work opportunities, those are two options, as well as internships that are subsidized or fellowships, because a lot of undocumented students, unfortunately, because Trump ended DACA for the past maybe like 4 years, those students were graduating completely undocumented because they were not able to access DACA. So there's like a lot of professionals that are coming out of college that don't have a ways to work. And when you think about international students as well, like international students with CPT and OPT have a lot of restrictions. So not even just limiting your scope to undocumented immigrants, but just all migrants at large, and you might have more opportunities that way as well. But we can connect. I can give you my email. We can talk a little bit deeper about this.
Let's definitely do that. Thank you so much, Joella. Looking forward to being in touch.
I also just wanted to say that you are now able to unmute yourself. So if you guys, I think we have a small enough group that if you just want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question, you can.
Hello, everyone. I don't have like a necessarily important question, but I really wanted to thank you all for sharing so much. I think more than anything else, for keeping it very hopeful, because I feel like conversations around these oftentimes tend to be ending towards like the pessimistic. And I feel very, it doesn't feel as if there isn't something else that's out there to do. What I want to talk a little bit about, and I think we've all mentioned, is just how these anti-immigration regimes are using the border, which is the most anti-immigrant mechanism out there, to like even fortify it. For example, the European Union is paying North Africa and Turkey to literally keep out immigrants. And so it becomes, like a very lucrative business for people who are smuggling immigrants, and also for these countries' military operations. And things like these, I think, exist in a way that is more difficult to talk about, because all of a sudden there are people who are frozen in camps, like unable to move in any way whatsoever. And these lack of movements are very global, beginning from Gaza, which is the largest open air prison in the world, all the way to Libya, for example, a country that is deeply marred in anti-blackness rhetoric that becomes even more dangerous as time goes on. And so I was wondering if you're all more or less like involved in these ideas about discussions around the border. I know, like in America, it's probably like the most dangerous border out there, and the way in which they use military grade operation to literally subdue and hunt for migrants is something that has been made into like a very partisan and almost like opinion-based issue. So I wonder if there are work around immigration, around bordering that you're all familiar with, or if there is a recommendation towards maybe further reading or different ways of engaging with this. But more than anything, thank you so much for keeping it very hopeful.
Thank you as well. Thank you as well. Honest, a large part of it isn't as hopeful as the things that we discussed. As hard as that may be to believe, especially what you've touched on. The US does use more military power to control these borders and that sort of thing, but Europe has devised a more strategic way to do it. Unfortunately, the new Global Compact on Migration that was ratified not long ago allows for migrants to be kept in detention centers for an unspecified amount of time. And there's absolutely nothing that anyone can do about it, because the countries that are doing this are doing it without any policing organizations or any external surveying bodies. And the European countries who are not involved are donating to this migration compact as a way of not housing these migrants themselves. The rules around what determines if you're able to enter the European Union, for instance, are created in-house and are not scrutinized again by any external body. And so that's also very, very difficult to police. And they've ratified this compact and they're all in it. So it's very difficult to work our way around it. And the most effective thing that we've started doing is having conversations around this and raising awareness about it. As for whether there is hope in sight, as of now, I cannot say that there is, per what I've seen and per what I've learned, because of how tightly knit these countries are. They're in cahoots with each other, and it's really, really difficult to beat bodies like the United Nations and the European Union and get them to change these sorts of compacts and these sorts of rules. I keep joking in Africa that I don't know if you're familiar with the term 419, any of you. It's a very popular term in Africa. It means fraud. It originated from Nigeria. It's the code in their constitution against fraud. Nigeria is, I think, #1 in Africa for cyber fraud, and so that gives a little bit of background. But we joke in Africa that the United Nations and the European Union is the world's largest legal 419 institutions on the planet, and so it gives you a small idea on how difficult it is to migrate or to navigate these compacts that have been drawn up by them and ratified by themselves to create detention centers and to deport migrants. So you'll find that a lot of people are on European soil but are not allowed to enter the European Union, and this is a large problem. In Africa also, and African leaders are not talking about this, and they wait until they're invited to Europe and the Americas to gain picture opportunities and talk about the surface of this issue. There are detention centers and underground slave markets that have emerged in countries like Libya, where
Yeah, looks like your internet is fading in and out.
of Libya. I'm sorry, yeah. Is it back? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so in Libya, there are residents being kept underground in modern slave prisons, and they're being sold for $300 and $500. And these are all things that are going on in African countries, and African leaders are not talking about them, and they're not allowing organizations to talk about them either. And it's unfortunate, but I do feel as though if enough voices make noise about it, like what happened with the Black Lives Matter march in the US and around the world, if that sort of thing happens around these sorts of issues, then we can begin to make some headway around it. But as of now, there isn't enough news on it. There isn't enough information on it, and not enough people are, yes, exactly, same in Uganda. Not enough people are discussing these things. A large reason also is because people are afraid to discuss these matters, either for personal safety or because their organizations will be shadow banned, as it were. But I think as much as we can, we should put our fear aside and choose to do what is necessary, as opposed to what's convenient.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so in Uganda, there's like agencies that like attract young people, right? And I mean, if you have an 87% poverty rate, people are trying to find work any way that they can. So there's these agencies that are from the Middle East that like attract these young people to go abroad to the Middle East and work, right? But when they go abroad, they work and don't like receive, like if they do receive money, like it's like literally bare bones. But most of the time they don't receive money, and they're literally like held captive for years to just like work in, for these companies or whatever in the Middle East. And so that's actually becoming a really, really big thing because especially now, like there's been no mobility in terms of poverty rate going down. And so they're becoming more and more attractive to like the youth population. So you have like literally, my aunt tells me, like planes of like young 19 to 20-year-olds and below kids getting sent to the Middle East and never coming back home. So it's insane, and people don't know about that.
That's so crazy. Oh, my bad.
Sorry, please go on.
Okay. Oh, but keep your thought because I don't want you to lose it. But I think it's really crazy how both money and borders are not real, yet it's causing like so many problems. And to give like perspective to the US border, first of all, we have a campaign. Lord, it slipped me. Something about dignity. Don't tell them I forgot. It's a campaign basically to work with those who are at the border because traditionally, if you're seeking asylum, because of course, like the US border is closed. So what you will have is like people going to the US border saying, hey, I want to seek asylum, and they will have to wait. And there's an average of like 2 years to wait for your case to be heard. And so you would have literally like tents surrounding the US border of people waiting for their time to come up. And that is like currently what's going on. And previously we had what Trump had the Remain in Mexico policy, the migrant protocol, something, MPP, but also known as the Remain in Mexico policy, where people who do not speak Spanish, right? Imagine traveling through 4 different countries to get to the United States, and they tell you you can't stay here and you have to stay in Mexico to basically seek asylum. You do not have access to lawyers, right? Like you're literally coming here with all that you have left. And so you can imagine what that process is, and not even just like language barriers, legal assistance. You're not guaranteed what's it called, a lawyer or anything like that. So the process is just like extremely hard when you talk about like the United States border in general, and then worse yet, being exacerbated because of COVID and our borders being closed, which right now is a violation. Not that we find legitimacy in laws, but just like the point that people, politicians claim to be law enforcement and to uphold law, and they're literally breaking international law by having the borders being closed right now. We have cities open. Literally, I can walk around in Washington, D.C. right now with no mask. So why can't immigrants at the border who have nothing, who came here for refuge, enter this country? Well, because our bodies have always been commodification. Slavery and migration, all those things have always been for monetary gain. So if there's a system that is keeping pockets full, keeping prisons full, keeping detention centers full and jails full, then they're not going to change it. And so that's why you see so much pushback when it comes to positive reinforcement of our immigration system. But I do want to negate and say that we are getting wins. Like through it all, we're able to, like, for instance, TPS was just redesignated to Haiti. So even though those at the border are still struggling to enter the country, those who are in the country that was fighting for TPS or never had access to TPS can now have temporary protective status. And of course, there are people like Haitian Bridge Alliance and all of these organizations that are at the border doing direct service to help our immigrant community. So like, even though you're 100% correct, and I think that's why a lot of people don't engage in these conversations, because it's so depressing. Like even someone who lives it and studies it, I'm just like, Lord have mercy. So I get it. But really, thank you for that point around like ending and keeping hope integrated into these conversations, because a lot of people are just like, well, if it's so bad, what can I do? And just steps away. So thank you so much for the knowledge that you imparted and just like bringing that up.
Thank you. Ria, I don't know if you had like the point that you wanted to revisit.
Yeah, it was just building up on what you said, Chanel, about these young women going by the plane full to the Middle East and the agencies that are recruiting them. So in Ghana, the way that it happens, and it's really disappointing that it's still happening in this day and age, is that they've got A4 sheet posters pasted on telephone poles or light posts that say work in Europe or work in Asia, and they have an agency's number there. And this is how the young women are being recruited. And our immigration services know this, but they're still allowing them to travel. And what happens when they arrive is their passports are indeed seized, and they are sold into, they're cordoned off in a room and sold into modern day slavery. And everyone knows this is happening, but no one's doing anything about it. And with regards to staying hopeful and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, this is something that we can start tackling. This is small enough at the local level and large enough externally to start tackling, at least making noise about taking down these posters and stopping these people, or charging agencies to do follow-up phone calls and find out who's at the head of these organizations and taking them out. Because too many of our young women who are migrating from outside of capital cities for the search of better lives are falling into these traps. And it's been going on for years and years and years, and it's high time that at least stopped while we tackle the larger things like the migration compact and that sort of thing.
Agreed.
I also wanted to add to, sorry to cut you off, please. Also that, yeah, these things have been gendered for a long time. I come from Ethiopia, and a great number of people who migrate to the Gulf countries in particular are women. But lately, though, there's like the development of new wealth being found in the Middle East, in particular, these countries making their images. There's the World Cup happening, which has become like a death zone for migrants. That I don't know the statistics exactly, but thousands of workers are dying on a daily basis to build a stadium, for a very, very like nefarious and capitalistic intent, which is to reimagine the images of these deeply brutal and crazily hegemonic countries. And so much of that completely is discarded because there is so much money in there that's coming out of these countries that are being put into Western institutions. And all of a sudden, all their ideas about human rights, about legality, about what's right, about what's wrong has, taken the back seat. The money is now part of the financial sectors of the world. The fact that like the president of Saudi Arabia can come and kill a journalist in the West and still somehow get away with it, especially journalists that's covering, the migration issues that are happening in their specific countries, is deeply troubling. But it also, I think, shows a very deeply ongoing relationship between power and money that has always existed, and especially takes the backseat when it comes to the lives of Black people in particular. And many of these workers in Qatar in particular are Black children, many of them teenagers going there in promise of something that is improbable and impossible, and working to their deaths more or less. And that tournament seems to, it's going to happen regardless. I think the World Cup is going to happen in Qatar, and so many of these European countries, are saving face by putting in these like image building protests about like the human rights condition in Qatar deteriorating, but they are participating in them in the end. They are going to participate in them in the end. They are the ones who chose for Qatar to be the ones that will host this tournament in the end. And the fact that there are billions of dollars involved in this makes it, I think, for many of us, confirms the fact that there isn't an intent to care about human rights anyways from the West in particular. All of these things have been a way to manage to influence, to increase their influences over the ways in which we lead our democracies, our institutions, to weaken them, whatever intent possible to change those systems so that we are more or less creating replications that are weak versions of things that exist in the West. But yeah, the way that it's deeply gendered, I think, also requires a deeper analysis as well.
Agreed. Agreed. Thank you so much for your insightful questions and just thoughts, Abdul. I also just want to wrap up because it is 12:20 and Alan has the recording going. So I want us to at least stop that so that he can step on to his next meeting. But just to wrap up, just wanted to give the panelists the opportunity to just say some closing statements. Keep it brief as if you can, just so that it can be on the recording. And if people, want to stay on after, that's perfectly fine, but just want to get this part in the recording and then we can continue having a conversation.
I think in short, I'd like to close with this. If this is something that's important to you, find out what you can do and do it. However small, just do it. And that's it.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I also want to encourage everyone to lead in love and to care about the next person. Just because you aren't necessarily directly impacted doesn't mean you shouldn't care about the impact. I wake up and think every day, wow, how grateful that I'm not looking outside and buildings are blown down and bombs are being dropped and I can identify what gun is being shot by an army. But that should not be the predicament of anyone. Like, I shouldn't be grateful for that. And so as much as I'm grateful for the work that I'm doing, my goal is to win so that people can truly enjoy their lives and not have to focus on their survival. And so I really hope that you join us in this fight and help in some way.
Yeah, and I think I will just echo that again. Activism doesn't have to look like this grandiose thing, right? It really can be implemented in and integrated in your daily life, right? So even if that's as small as having a conversation with your one uncle who has been, and xenophobic and anti-immigration, I think that that's a start, right? So I think that really trying to integrate activism in your daily life rather than, trying to take on this really big project and ending racism and ending all, you know, immigration matters, or issues that are afflicting people. Yeah, taking it little by little, I think is really important, because it can seem really, really overwhelming. I think we talked about a lot of things that were like, damn, yo, like, how do we even, where do we begin? So yeah, taking it little by little and really integrating that into your daily life. Okay, thank you all so much. Alan, feel free to end the recording. This was amazing, amazing conversation. I think there's definitely going to be more of these to come. I think we need to have conversations like this regularly. Joella, Ria, thank you. You guys provided amazing insight. I learned a lot as well, so I hope the rest of the audience members did. But thank you guys so much. This was really, really amazing.